You got me now?
Got you now.
Okay. Share screen, right?
Share screen.
You all have to bear with me. It's my first time doing this in a major group, so. Okay, here we go. There we go. Hi, everybody. First, I'd like to, the Harford County Conservancy, has, I've visited there numerous times. I've had the opportunity to do a few in-person programs. I've had the opportunity to supply some of my photographs for your auctions and stuff, and it truly is a wonderful organization. And the physical plan itself is beautiful. I can't speak enough about the place and the folks there that I've worked with. But you don't want to hear me talk about that stuff. You want to hear me talk about the critters. My journey, I'm a saunterer. And what that means is I wander aimlessly with a purpose, if that makes any sense to you. When I head out, I'm not a photographer who sits in a screen or quietly in one spot. I move constantly till something does strike my attention, and then I might spend the next hour there photographing and take a look at them. But what this does, it gives me an opportunity to get a huge diversity of the wildlife that's out there. What I'm going to do tonight is something I enjoy. I'm probably the world's worst photographer. Thank God for autofocus. Without that, I probably wouldn't get anything. But most good nature photographers will tell you that because you don't have time to set your exposure, to adjust your camera. It's put it on autofocus and hope that the shot that you take comes out. When you take your shot, you might take 30, 40 shots as quick as you can. And then the great joy is once you get home and start reviewing them, you get some pictures you never actually saw with your own eye or anticipated. And it just, my wife thinks I'm crazy because I sit there and laugh and smile and dance around sometimes as I'm going through them. So we're going to go through some of them. And as a naturalist too, one of the great skills that I think I do bring in, not to say that I have a lot of skills, but not so much as a photographer, but the eyes of a naturalist, as it says. I know the time of the year to look, to see where they live. And by doing that, I can pretty much target where I want to take, what animals I want to see. So with that, let's just go through some of the slides. There we go. I'm not sure what button to punch there. One of the beauties about Maryland, and that includes down in Howard County or up where I live in Harford County, we have estimated over 90 species of animals, 93 species and subspecies of reptiles and amphibians, and over 400 species of birds. And I'm not going to go too much into all of that, but to realize the diversity we have in our state is just fantastic. Now, to me, to photograph, to take photographs is to look for that unique one. I watched this little guy and I must have shot 30, 40 shots of this little chipmunk or this little ground squirrel, as we call him. And this is the one that really struck my eye, the abnormal one. When I take a photograph, the ones I select are the ones that tell a story. But when I look at it, nobody has to describe anything to me. I just look at it and go, isn't that the coolest thing ever? Chipmunks are kind of an interesting critter. We see them all the time. I think what fascinates me, and this is where it's doing a program like this is difficult because I don't get the immediate feedback. But if you've ever taken the time to watch a chipmunk, how many of you actually have ever seen a chipmunk den? And what I think is kind of cool, that little guy right there, when he digs his den, they're very solitary. The only time they mingle is when it comes time to mate and when they're raising their young, which only one of them really does. They don't really help each other. But their lodge is one of the coolest things. You'll never see other than a small hole in the ground, about the size of a 50-cent piece. That's the entrance to their home. And below that hole, what's amazing is there's 3 chambers. One is a bedroom chamber, which is about the size of 2 coffee cups stuck together. They have a bathroom, believe it or not, because they stay down most of the winter. And that's probably the size of 4 coffee cups stuck together. That's the best comparison I can make. And then they have a food storage area the size of a bushel basket. Now, all of this is excavated. And I think the coolest thing is we've all seen chipmunks with their pouches full of seeds taken down into the hole with them. Well, they take every bit of the dirt they excavate, they put it into their mouth, there's little pouches, and they run many, many feet away from the entrance to the lodge and spit it out all over the place. And there's never that telltale entrance to their lodge other than just a hole in the ground. Now, one other thing that happens, they put enough food away They probably only eat 50% of what they store away. That other 50%, many of the oak trees, many of the different tree species we see is a result of the chipmunks putting the seeds under the ground. They germinate down there, and then we come up with a new forest. So we can thank this little guy, just only that he's so cute, but also what he does for us all the time. In Maryland, there's a lot of species of animals which a lot of us we hear about, but we don't get to see any of very often. This is a mink, and there are plenty of minks around. But a mink is probably, he reminds me of an overactive child. They never stay still. They are constantly moving. I have seen a mink, and then I literally run as fast as I can down along the side of a bank, along a creek, trying to snap as many pictures as I can. And I mean run. So I'm probably a very hysterical person to see as I'm out there photographing these guys. Now, this particular guy was one winter a couple of months ago. I was going down an old gravel road. I looked over on the ice, and the creek was frozen at that point, obviously, the ice. And I see this mink sort of scouring along the ice. I just bought a new lens, a 600mm lens, my new baby. I had never even used it. And I said, oh, God, what an opportunity. So I jump out of my truck, leave the door open, it's running. It's probably one of those 12-degree days. I've got this camera with this new lens, and I'm trying to find him. I lost sight of him. And I'm along the bank looking, and next thing I know, here he comes. And that's the first sight I saw. He pops up over the bank right in my face, stares at me. I don't know who yelled quickest or screamed the most. Well, at least visually we screamed at each other. I snapped and I snapped and I snapped. He turned around, went down the bank. So I had only seconds to get a couple cool shots. And then once he hit the ice again, I got quite a few shots down on the water. But I don't know who was more surprised that he came up. It was either he or myself. Now, a wildlife biologist friend of mine, I showed this to because I questioned it. If you look under his chin, which I can't put my finger up, but most minks under the base of their chin have a white spot. This guy doesn't have one. But if you looked at his left leg, you might see the white fur there. They always have a white spot, but almost 100% of the time it's under their chin. This particular guy, and this wildlife biologist said it's the first one he ever saw, had the white on his leg versus under his chin. To me, that's exciting, so I enjoy seeing stuff like that. But this is one of the species. I'm going to go through a handful to start out with. One other thing I should point out, too, as I work with a slideshow like this, I put all my pictures in, and I'm as excited as you to see what comes up next, because I really don't remember what I put in the show. So when it pops up, I really get excited, think about what I've got there. So it's kind of fun for me. Okay, come on now. There we go. Black bears. Now, this particular photograph was taken on my front porch. I went home one day from the nature center where I worked, and I live right on the Pennsylvania line. I'm in Maryland, but right on the PA line. And I was picking up some equipment for one of my barns, and I looked up, and if you notice to the left of the picture, there's these light poles pulled down with a bird feeder. It's bent over. And that was the first thing I saw. And I said, what in the heck? And then I see this black head pop up over the hostas that are there. And I thought, whose stupid dog just yanked my post down? I no sooner said that till my brain clicked in, and I won't repeat the actual words that I use, but I said, that's a black bear. It's a young male. He probably weighed 90 to 100 pounds. And in the spring, what they do, they start moving around. Mom kicks them out. The young males have to find their own territory. They do their own walkabout, and they wander up and down all the watersheds. And I live right off of a watershed coming out of Pennsylvania. So this guy decided, I guess he has pretty good sense of smell, to eat all my sunflower seeds. So I was happy to sacrifice my feeder for that. But just to the right of him was another feeder. And what he did, he went over there, ripped the feeder off of that tree, all the sunflower seeds spilled out, and he spent the next half an hour just feasting on it. I went up on my deck, probably 15 feet away, was talking to him, looking at him, and he was just pigging out and did not want to leave at all. I even had the time to call my wife, who only worked a few miles away, to come home. I said, park in behind the house, come through the house, and come on out front. And we both sat there and watched this guy eat our sunflower seeds for about 10 minutes. Suddenly, he looked up and realized there's two of those two-legged creatures up there, and I'm not very comfortable with that. And he bolted, took off, went probably 30 feet away, went up against the tree and stood up as tall as he could. And that's the first time I felt intimidated, because he was much bigger when I standing up like that than he was. And he was gone. Didn't see him again after that. A friend of mine further down said that the next day they went to go out to their front porch and went to open their sliding glass door up and couldn't get it open. And he was sound asleep right up against their sliding glass door. So he spent about a week in our area and then moved off completely. And we don't know where he went, but we see him around here regularly. My bird feeders this year were visited by a black bear. They were just torn to pieces, and he's the only critter that could have done it. So I'm probably the only person that smiles when my feeders are ripped apart. But my only disappointment was I didn't get to see him. I have since bought a game camera to put by those feeders, but so I'll keep my eyes open. So excuse me. So that's another one of the creatures we find around here. And a skunk. Now, that's an animal that I've seen quite a few, sadly, along the highway, but to see a live one anymore becomes a rarity, even though I think the numbers are increasing. This guy, I'm fortunate enough, I live up here in Harford County. I've got about 7-8 acres of woods where my house is. And every morning I take my yellow lab out for a walk. And this morning that this guy came along, my wife was with me. She decided to go with me that morning. I said, I'm gonna take my camera just for the heck of it. So we're heading out in the woods, and next thing I knew, I see this bushy tail sticking up behind a log. Well, at the instant I saw it, my dog saw it. My wife was holding the dog, and my wife probably weighs 115. The dog weighs 135. So you can imagine the comical show, the comedy that put on for us. And she was quite perturbed to me because instead of helping her, I decided to see if I could get some good photographs of this guy. Got right up to him. He looked at me. I got some really beautiful shots until he turned around, and I decided it was time to leave, because when they turn their rear end towards you, that's when they're deciding to probably spray you. And I really didn't want to do that. And plus, I saw my wife sitting on the ground trying to hold the dog back. I figured at that point, I better go help her too if I still want to have a happy home around here. But that was one of the best opportunities I've had to see a skunk in the wild. And I smell them quite often around here, but it's one of the few times I saw one. I'm in my 70s. Sometimes my brain goes. Sandhill crane. There we go. Couldn't get it out. Sandhills, probably a decade ago to see one around here would have been almost impossible to see. We do have one area in Harford County that they seem to come back all the time. But this particular guy, I have an area, a friend of mine's farm. He has 3 ponds in it, a lot of wetlands. And I call it my sanctuary because I'm the only person that allows to go in there and photograph and sneak around. And one morning I headed over, I was actually looking into the sun, and I see this big bird out there. Then I saw another one. And if I couldn't figure out what it was to begin with until it finally clicked in, that's a doggone sandhill crane. And I have never seen one around here of this closeness. So the funniest thing was the angle I was at with the sun just coming over the horizon, I could not get a photograph of this guy because the sun was going to wipe me out. So I spent the next 25 minutes sneaking, probably very hysterical to watch me do this, sneaking through the underbrush, sneaking around the ponds so I could get to the sun behind me to take pictures of this guy. And I started clicking away. And as I walked closer and closer, because I have a habit when I start shooting, no matter how far away I am, then move a little closer, then shoot, then a little closer and shoot. So at least I always have something. Well, I got within 15 feet of this guy, and he could have cared less. So all my sneaking, I could have just blundered right up to him and snapped away at him. But he was working the wetlands. If you take a look at his bill, you can see where he's been probing in the ground to pull up insects and mud like that. But this bird is a huge bird. He probably, if he stood up straight, I'm only 5'8", but I'm sure he would have stood a little bit taller than I am. Just beautiful. There was 2 of them in there that day. They spent most of the day there. And since then, I've never seen another one around here. So that was just one of those mornings that, you sort of do the hallelujah dance when you get the opportunity. And then when I got home, I was covered in mud, briars all over me, but I was smiling and I couldn't care less. Another one, which we have quite a few of in Maryland right now, probably again 15, maybe 20 years ago, it would have been tough to see them, is river otters. Now, the nature center I worked at, there was a director for 30 years until I retired a few years ago, is on a big creek called Deer Creek. It's Eden Mill Nature Center, and we're located in a 200-year-old grist mill which has an 18-foot dam. So behind that, we have plenty of deep water. And in the winter, as you can see the snow, it attracts these guys. Now, what's interesting about this shot, this was just the spring, was one of the last snows we had. And with a sidebar on that, if you notice the three otter to the right of them, you'll see all the leaves and the mud piled up. That's a beaver scent mound. That's how the beavers mark their territory. They pull mud from the bottom of the creek, mixed in with the old leaves, pile it up and leave some of their castor onto that to mark their territory. And that's what drew my attention over there when I see these guys bobbing around. But what's fun about this, you got three otters. If you notice, the two behind the first otter are a little bit lighter in color, a little bit smaller than the first one, because that's the female. The female's the one on the left going in the water first. And I've seen her for probably about 6 or 7 years. And the way I can recognize her, there's a picture later on better of her, but you notice the little pink spot on her nose? She's had a tangle with somebody. So those are scars on her nose. And we see her quite regularly. And this was this year's young, and this was sort of their last hurrah. And these guys came and probably spent over a half an hour right in front of me within feet away. And again, I hope the picture pops up soon of her. She comes up with a fish, lays on her back, just feet away from me and eats it. And it's just one of those moments you giggle like I'm 73, but I'm still giggling like a little kid when I see stuff like that. But this is her last hurrah. Now, river otters are kind of interesting. The male's only purpose in the river otter world is to procreate, to mate with the female. That's it. That's nothing to do with the raising of the young. Once he's had his moment, his fling, he's gone. And the female, she has something called delayed implantation, which a lot of animals have. She'll keep the sperm within her for up to almost a year until conditions are right, possibly even longer than that. And when conditions are right, food supplies right, habitat's right, she then will allow them to join in with the eggs and produce that year's young. And normally she'll have 2 to 3, and they're just a joy to watch. They are some of the most comical animals. I see them in the snow. We see their slides all the time, but just an animal that I really enjoy taking an opportunity to observe. This was a special one to me. It's an eagle, but what it is, it's not a bald eagle, it's a golden eagle. Now, this was probably about 8 to 10 years ago up again at Eden Mill. Every morning I would go out early to take photographs when nobody else is there, just do my sauntering. And I was coming back a pedestrian bridge across one of the side creeks, and I looked up and saw this big dark bird up in a tree. And one of my lessons I learned that day was I kept walking by going, that's another vulture. I got plenty of pictures of vultures. Then I said to myself, no, go back. You never know what that vulture's doing. And when I took time to really look, I realized, oh my God, I believe that's a golden eagle. And the best way to tell, it's a juvenile golden and a juvenile bald eagle look very similar, but the best way to tell, if you look where he's sitting on the branch, you can just see his talons hanging over. Bald eagles have bare feet and bare legs up, probably about 2 inches up before the feathers start. Golden eagles have feathers, we call them socks, all the way down almost to their toes. And it was a golden eagle. And I snapped pictures of him. But even then, I was like, that's got to be a golden. But they're not down here. We don't see them that often. What I learned later on was we're right at the southerly edge of how far they come down here. We think we're seeing more and more of them because as the world changes, but back at that point, we didn't. So I sent the picture to a good friend of mine who's an ornithologist. I took about 2 days to send it to him. And he came back and he said, Frank, that's a juvenile golden eagle. And he was really excited about it, but he really got upset when I took 2 days to tell him because he didn't get a chance to come see it. So if any of you are birders out there, you know that feeling. Boy, let's get out there and see this guy. But he gave me quite a show. I actually took some video of him flying. So there's just so much out there for us to see. This is another one we don't see that often. This is a Glossy Ibis. And it's just, I've grown to realize as you saunter, as you wander, and as you look and you see, there's much more out there that we look around a lot, but we don't see a whole lot. You have to learn to discipline yourself to really see when you're out there. What's the anomaly? What's that color that doesn't look right? Nature has pretty much a symmetry to it if you look at it. It might look like it's all just haphazard, But once you get used to that symmetry of it, things that break up that symmetry, such as a horizontal line, which might be a deer's back, or a color you don't often see, seems out of place. And that could draw your attention into what you're looking for. And once I discipline myself to do that, I think I've seen a heck of a lot more. But this guy, ibises, you don't see too many glossies. You might see them down on the Eastern Shore some, Bombay Hook, places like that. But this little one was right up at Eden Mill. And I spent a lot of them from at Eden Mill because I spent so many years there with my camera.
Frank,
This is a, yes.
yeah, I just want to take a little break and tell you about a little conversation in the chat. A question came up about the chipmunk, one of the earlier pictures. And a guest has said that they've never seen chipmunks before. They've seen lots of squirrels. And then there was a little back and forth. Could you talk just a little bit about the differences between chipmunks and squirrels?
Yep, they're both in the squirrel family. One of them's called a ground squirrel, the gray squirrel, which we're all very familiar with around here. He probably pesters us to no end, eats all our bird seed, drives us crazy. But the chipmunk is, gosh, about twice the size of a big mouse, I guess. I'm surprised they're very, very common. I guess it depends where you live, what the food supply might be, but they're very competitive with the gray squirrels in respect to the food. If you live in an area with a lot of cats, sadly, they are one of the first victims of cats. So if there's a lot of cats in your community or where you're at, you probably won't see too many chipmunks. They're also easier prey for a lot of your birds of prey also. But they're a very, very common animal throughout most of the United States. I will say, like all animals, they seem to go through periods of when they're abundant and periods when they're not. And again, some of that could be what some of the predators were in the area. As long as the food supply is there, the predators there. Once the food supply dwindles, such as chipmunks, then those predators leave, and that allows the chipmunks to come back in again. So there's so many variables. But I don't know of any place, if there's an ample food supply for the critters, that we wouldn't find them. So I hope that helps you out with your thoughts on that. This guy was another happy moment I had. If any of you are owlers out there, or birders, you recognize him as a snowy owl. This was within 5 minutes of Eden Mill Nature Center where I worked. And to give you an idea where Eden Mill is, it's probably, Bel Air is probably a town you might know if you live in Harvard or have been in this area, and it's probably about 15 minutes north of Bel Air, maybe a half an hour north of Towson. But it's a rural area. We're not too far from the Pennsylvania line, and we have a beautiful creek called Deer Creek on it, so many animals come up there, a lot of farmland, and that's what attracts a snowy owl. They'll come out in these open fields, which are similar to the tundra where they come from. After these fields have been cut down, and in the wintertime, it's full of rodents and so forth. And snowy owls, when they do move into this area, come in. Some years we'll see several snowy owls in Harford County. Some years we won't see any. This was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. This guy spent about 3 weeks in our area. It was quite the ham. Everybody in the world came up to take photographs of him. I try my best. One of the cardinal rules I go by is to not disturb the animals any way that I can, just to get a photograph. So I invested in a big lens, a 600 millimeter lens, which allows me to get some pretty good shots, which look, I'm almost sitting on top of them, but they're a good ways away from me. Now, I think the next slide, well, anyway, the snowy owl, this is pretty much a ground hunter. They stay down on the ground. So it's kind of surprising to see him sitting in a tree, to be honest with you. I suppose it's a beautiful shot. Look at those eyes. Can you believe those eyes on that guy? Okay, let's go to the next one. Now this, come on, slide, jump. Oh, there we go. This is the same snowy owl. I was taking photographs of him, and all of a sudden I realized there was a hawk, or what I thought was a hawk, coming down to harass him. He threw his wings up in the air. I was so intent on photographing the snowy owl, and I've got a whole series. This guy is coming closer and closer. This was the best one. I took this photograph. I was so excited that it was a snowy owl being harassed by a hawk. I sent it out to a couple of friends of mine, and one of them is a young lady she does bird banding. This is a teacher. She's an ornithologist. And she says to me, Frank, do you have any idea what that hawk is? That's a peregrine falcon. And as soon as I looked at it, I said, you're right, but I did not bother to look that close at the peregrine falcon. Now, to see a peregrine falcon up my way is like, it's so rare. You might be lucky to see one every 4 or 5 years. So this is the ultimate to me, to have a peregrine falcon and a snowy owl in Harford County in the same frame. This is like, if I never take another photograph again, I enjoy the heck out of it. But take a look at that. There was no owls were harmed in the taking of these pictures. I'll tell you that right now. He pretty much told that peregrine to take off and not bother him anymore. But it was one of those I got a whole series of these, but I'm not going to rash you with the rest of them on it. But I just, if I never took another photograph again, this makes me happy. So I think now I got a series of owl pictures coming up. This is not the smallest owl we have around here. This guy's probably 6-7 inches tall. He sounds like he comes from Walmart. He comes in 2 color phases, but he actually, and I don't know why they call them color phases, because that's their actual color. They don't change. But it's either the red phase like this or the gray phase. This is a screech owl. This is one of the few owls. Well, actually, most owls don't make the traditional sound of hooting like we call them. This guy actually, if you might have heard him trilling, sounds like a horse. That's just. You have to be in your 70s before you humiliate yourself by making owl sound. But anyway, but this guy, this owl has come back to my area, to my property, probably in the last 6 years. Every year he's come back. This is his favorite tree. And I just keep waiting and waiting and waiting until he comes out. He's facing into the sun, and every afternoon when the sun hits that tree during the fall, he pokes his head out and just sits there. He doesn't, I don't bother him one iota. I can get within 25 feet of him and he's fine. If I get within 24 feet, he drops down that hole and he won't come back again for a half an hour. So he just has, somehow he knows that's where it can be. I see him every day. My grandsons have seen him, and he just sits there and stares at us every day. He changes from this hole. I have an owl box outside of my house he'll visit sometimes. I find him in 3 different places around here. I'm assuming it's him because I see the same color phase, and there probably wouldn't be that many in that close a territory. So I assume it's him, but that's your little screech owl. Those little tufts up top, they're not really horned. They're just feathers to make him look ferocious. What I enjoy about them, take a look at his eyes. Every screech owl I ever seen looks like they're cross-eyed.
Frank, we have a question about your camera.
Okay.
Or the one in the lens that you used for the snowy owl and the falcon.
What I use is a Canon. It's a 5D Mark IV. I've used a series of cameras over the years. And like everybody, you get greedy and want a better one and a better one and a better one. And they've now come out with mirrorless cameras, which I really want to get. But anyway, I use a Mark D. So right now I'm using a Canon 5D Mark IV. I use a 600, it's a, what is it, a 150? I got it right here as a matter of fact. I think it's 150 to 600, and it's a telephoto lens, which means I can actually, while I'm working with it, go from 150 to 600 just by winding it out or winding it back in again. What I like about it, it's reasonably priced. If anything, a camera's reasonably priced. If you went with a Canon lens, you'd probably spend about $5,000 to $8,000 on one like this. This one's a really good, one of the best aftermarkets, and it's like $1,500, which is still a heck of a lot of money, but I don't have any other vices other than my camera. Don't ask my wife that question, but anyway.
And do you use a tripod or a unipod?
Sometimes I use a monopod, but most of the time I just brace myself against the tree, or you bring your arms against your chest and take it. And you'll see a lot of people hold a camera with their hand on top, and you get too much vibration. So you bring your hand up from the bottom to brace it, and that way you can use the telephoto and lock it in and out. And again, I don't do a whole lot with settings. I'm on autofocus all the time because you don't have a whole lot of time when this stuff's going on to do anything other than just click away. And I will stress again, you never get the ideal picture, whatever that would be. You just rip away. You click, 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 go crazy. Take 30, 40 shots of this. I think it's all digital. It doesn't cost you anything to do it. It's not like you used to do when you had to develop. And sometimes you will get some that'll just blow your mind. It's just an expression, a look, whatever it might be. So I hope that answers your question. My email will be someplace. If somebody wants more information, you can just email me and I'll be happy to discuss it with you more. This is one of my favorite animals of the owl world. This is called a barred owl. He's got dark eyes. The other big owl of this, roughly this size, would be your great horned owl, and they have yellow eyes. That's the quickest way to see the difference. Plus, he has a round face. What's interesting, there's a good picture, look at it. Owls' eyes don't move. That's why we think they can rotate their heads all around, which they really can't. But their eyes are fixed in their skull. And their eyes are triggered in by their hearing. And if you look at those big feathers around both eyes, I wish I was here to put my finger right up the lens for you, or the picture. But see those big, they're called a facial disc, all those feathers that go around the eyes. He has 2 ears, and they're almost in the front of his head, not on the side. One's about an inch higher than the other. And what he does when he hears a sound, he'll triangulate on the sound until it's equal in both ears. Once it's equal, that means his eyes are looking directly at his prey. Once he knows he's looking directly at the prey, it's like a pair of zoom binoculars. He zooms in on the prey, he takes off, because they hunt from a tree. They do not hunt by flying. They sit. They actually go in for dinner by flying towards it. But once they get their eyes on it and their hearing on it, they go straight in and generally go right in and grab dinner, a mouse, a squirrel, whatever it might be. Sadly, a chipmunk. But this guy probably would take more rodents than anything. But this is one of the only 2 owls we got around here that actually hoots. The rest of them make all kinds of insane sounds, screeches and hisses and everything else. But this guy will actually hoot. And you might have heard the one that sounds like, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" That's this guy. I think he's from Georgia. Got to get you all at the end. Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? I would do my owl call for you, but I don't know how it would come across on a thing like this. You'll find a barred owl generally is going to be along water, along reservoirs, along ponds, along creeks, because he also hunts a lot of frogs, hunts a lot of snakes, a lot of the stuff that lives along the water. That's his niche. The great horned owl is going to be along the edges of fields and things of that nature. It's much bigger. If you're into calling owls, which we used to do a lot at the nature center, particularly in the evening, you never want to call the great horned owl before you would try to call a barred owl, because the great horned owl will prey on every other species of owl. So if you're looking for barred owls and you call a great horned owl, guess where the barred owls are gone? They're gone, man. They just say, "I'm out of here. I'm not going to be dinner for this guy." But a beautiful bird, the softest eyes. What do we got coming up now? Let's see. Now this is a great horned owl. See the different color in the eyes? I came home one afternoon to my house, let my dog out, and he sat on the front yard and just went hysterical. Kept barking and barking, and I looked out, and there on the ground was this juvenile, a baby great horned owl. This guy had just fledged. He couldn't even fly back to his nest. Great horns, when they fledge, they try to fly, but they always end up on the ground. What they'll do after that is they'll go back to a tree and actually climb the tree. If you ever find one on the ground, leave it alone for a good while, maybe keep an eye on it. They'll climb back to the tree. But this guy was sitting down. I can still see all his fluffy feathers. As I got a little bit closer, he decided to go into this pose, which says, "I'm the biggest, baddest owl in town. You come closer to me and I'm going to go after you." Actually, he's probably scared to death. So I was taking quite a few good photographs of this fella. The only thing that bothered me was up in the trees on the left and the right was Mom and Dad, who were keeping a good eye on me. And I knew they would come down and visit me with a talon or two if I wasn't careful. So I stayed right up against the trees as I went out there. And again, I was a good distance away because I don't really want to disturb the animal. I did watch for a good while, and he finally climbed up a tree at Mom's encouragement and went back to the nest up there. So now this was one I took years I tried to get a hold of. That is the most bizarre looking owl. Looks like something out of X-Files, doesn't it? This is called a long-eared owl. He was up in a pine stand, and that's where they generally go. We don't see too many of them around here, and it gets the name long-eared, obviously, by those feather tufts. They're not really ears. All owls' ears are in their facial disc, but he was up in this pine. And what was interesting, I actually didn't find him. A friend of mine found him and said, "Frank, you got to come up and get a photograph of him," which I did. But below the tree, he must have been there for the last 2 months because there was owl pellets everywhere, and he was just hunkered down in there. And this is pretty dense brush to get into. It's an old succession field full of junipers and stuff of that nature. But that's an odd one when you see that face staring at you. But what's interesting, look at the diversity of what we're seeing. It's in our local area that you guys probably have 90% of this right there at the Conservancy somewhere. Because you have the water, you have all the bodies over there. This is kind of a fun one up along the Susquehanna. This is a big great blue heron rookery. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Conowingo Dam up our way. It's the last big dam on the Susquehanna River. And there's a great blue heron rookery. And I was taking photographs of the great blues on their nests with their young, and I should have some photographs of that later on. And just something struck me about this one. So I zoomed in on it, and there, lo and behold, is a great horned owl sitting in a great blue heron's nest, because they'll do that. Owls don't make their own nest, by the way. They will use somebody else's nest, either a red-tailed hawk, a red-shoulder hawk, in this case, a great blue heron. And what I'm looking at is the tail feathers with the face staring back over me. And I got to watch this guy for probably about 2 months. I saw some of the young pop their heads up after a while. And then the brush, the trees leafed in too much, and I couldn't see any more of it. I was hoping to really get a good stare at it. But your great horned owl is the largest owl we've got around here. The next biggest owl would be up in New England and into Canada, called the great gray owl. Well, this guy is called the tiger of the skies. There is nobody that bothers this guy, but he'll take every other owl out if he could. I've had the pleasure of working in rehab and working with quite a few of these guys, and these guys are just really just beautiful. But this is the other owl that hoots. The rest of them make weird sounds. This guys are very much, I'm all right, are you? If you get I don't know how that came across, but at least I can't see you laughing at me. So with that, but and those are the owls that we find in this area. We get saw-whets too, but I've never actually done a photograph of one. Coming home one day, and I looked over in the field, and there was 6 of these little baby raccoons in a cornfield, and they looked at me like, "Oh my God, you have seen us." And they were sort of scrambling, so I didn't get out of my car. I didn't want to bother him. I just opened, or my truck anyway. I opened up the window and started snapping photographs, and all the rest of them just took off. And this guy just sat there, sort of had to look. If I don't move, he will not see me. So I snapped a couple of pictures of him. This guy can't be more than a month or two old, really. Just a little teeny guy. I could have probably held him in one hand, about the size of maybe 2 coffee cups. So it was just one of my enjoyable moments. We see them around here quite often. Probably there's not a one of you wherever you live, whether it's in the city or anywhere, that have not had a raccoon visit you. These little bandits of the world right there. What's interesting about raccoons, back in the colonial period, they actually had them as house pets. And they are very docile, very wonderful little critters. They got a pretty bad rap about rabies because for a while there, for whatever reason, they had them out, and a lot of them were disappeared from that. But they're generally a gentle little animal. I could tell you a whole lot about them, but just probably the most fastidious little creatures you could ever see. That's a big tom turkey. One day up at Eden Mill, I'm walking along the creek, and Deer Creek's probably 150 feet across. And I look over, I'm on our boardwalk we got along one edge of it. I have my camera with me because I never go anywhere without it. And I see all these the hen turkeys over there all hunkered down. And I'm thinking, that's probably cool. And next thing I know, now, if you've ever tried to photograph turkeys or seen turkeys, what you normally see is their tail feathers, because these guys do not hang around. Once they see you, they're gone. I mean, it's like you can't even get excited. They move away so fast. But this guy, for whatever reason, my friends have had fun when I make this statement, but this guy must have thought I was a challenge to his rookery, or his little group of female turkeys, and he spent about 25 minutes puffed up with all his plumage, walking up and down the creek challenging me, going back and forth. So all my friends say I am a turkey, so I guess that's when I got to get out of this. But what a beautiful bird, look at that. And what you can't get from this picture is, if you notice all his chest feathers and working back, there you see a color, but as he's moving, they shimmer. All the feathers move. And it's like a rainbow of colors that just shimmer up and down his body. Just a beautiful animal. Turkeys were pretty much gone from this area. The Department of Natural Resources has reintroduced them all over the state, to the point now they're almost a pain. At the Nature Center, I used to get people calling from the lower parking lot saying, I need help. I can't get out of my car. There's 6 turkeys pecking at my legs as I try to get out of my car. So they're pretty brazen at times. We've actually had traffic stopped up here when they cross. I think the biggest flock I saw at Eden Mill was like 38 of them one day I counted, all out on the peninsula there. They love it. If you have an area with a lot of oak trees, one of their favorite foods in the winter is they'll browse and eat all the acorns. So it's not just the deer and other critters, but these guys love acorns.
Frank, we have another question about your camera and if you're able to take photos at night with it, and how far away can you be from your subjects with your camera to get clear shots?
Oh, wow. Generally, I don't know if I could give you an actual foot distance. Like say like this fox right here. When you do some photography, not only can you use a telephoto lens, but if you have a camera with a high enough resolution with enough pixels that is really dense, you also then can crop it and bring it up like you've got an even higher power lens. So this particular picture was taken with that 600mm lens, excuse me, and then I probably cropped it out to bring him in even closer because that has enough resolution that you could still get all this detail into it. I take pictures, oh gosh. The less light, the steadier the camera has to be. When you're using a long lens, like I'll go up and try to get some beavers that I have a new lodge that I've been taking photographs of, and you got to be there right at dawn if you want to see them. So the light's pretty low. The telephoto lens, the longer you extend the lens out, the less light is entering into the camera. The shorter you can keep your lens, the more light comes in, which means you could take pictures in lower light. So if I'm taking pictures of beaver in lower light, I mean, just dawn, just coming up, the sun just cracking over the edge, my telephoto lens isn't very effective for me because it would darken it out too much. So I take a short lens. Does that make sense to you? About a 150, 160 millimeter lens when it's shorter. So, and the same at dusk. The less light there is, the steadier the camera has to be too. So you can't have any movement. That's when you plant yourself against the tree and become part of the tree and wedge the camera as tight as you can and click away. So early morning, very late in the day, that's a time I might not saunter as much. If I already scouted out a fox den or I knew there's a beaver lodge, I might find a spot, use a tripod, or find a good tree with a nice crook in it that I can put the camera into and get myself really steady, because the camera itself is going to keep the exposure longer to try to get a picture. I don't know if that's too technical or makes any sense at all. I'm the philosophy, I'll take pictures no matter what it looks like and hope the heck I get something out of it. And sometimes it's amazing what I get. So never hesitate to shoot. I'd rather delete a bunch of cruddy ones and finally get that one good one than not get a shot out of it all.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to just ask everyone to keep your questions rolling into the chat. We'll probably wait until a little after 8 o'clock, right around 8 o'clock, to start the Q&A session, because we want to see a few more of Frank's marvelous photographs and hear the stories behind it. Like, tell us about this handsome one.
This guy, and it's impossible to tell between this male and a female and a fox when you see them. But this particular guy or young lady or whomever it was, I believe it was the male, because I was out one morning, and you get in, say, March and April, that's when these guys decide to mate up. And it's kind of fascinating. When they're really hungry in the winter, they ignore you. When it's time to find a mate, they ignore us. That's the best times to see them. The other times, they're pretty sly. They don't want anything to do with us. But I guess other urges are much more prevalent than caring about what we're doing. But this particular one, I was on the creek, and I heard them yelping back and forth, and it's a horrible sound if you ever heard foxes barking at each other. It's just that you think somebody's being murdered. But that keyed me in, like, okay, hey, what's going on? And I looked, there was 2 foxes, and I think this was the male, and he was really trying to entice the female to become his mate. he would go up to her and she would rebuff him. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is like, I can't imagine what I'm watching here. This went on for about 15 or 20 minutes. And finally, he got the hint, she wants nothing to do with me. So he started walking down the trail towards me. I had been pretty quiet at that point. It was pretty much hunkered down. And he's walking and walking and walking. And if you see his face, right about that point is when he finally saw me. He stopped dead. I snapped a couple pictures. I had tons of pictures up to that point of the whole episode going on with him, but he's coming down on me right there. Red foxes are pretty prevalent. The only real competition they got is us and coyotes, and the more coyotes we get, coyotes are one of the few things that will go after red foxes to clean them out. But there's plenty of red foxes around, and thank goodness they are. I think the Smithsonian once did a theoretical study that if we get rid of all the red foxes and all the birds of prey overnight, within 1 week we would be just, there wouldn't be a green blade of grass because all the rodents that would populate so quickly. So this guy is a very necessary part of our ecosystem to help keep the rodent population down. These guys will not bother us in any great way, shape, or form. I will never say they wouldn't do something, because that could happen with any species, but overall, they wouldn't. The other cool thing about them, if you look at those eyes, you see where they're like slit eyes like cats have? For many, many decades, this guy when they were first classifying these guys, honestly thought these guys were part of the cat family because of the way they moved, by the shape of their eyes. And they eventually moved them into the canine family. I could go on for hours with this guy, telling you kind of cool stuff about him, tracking them in the winter, seeing which they go. But they are one of the most beautiful, delicate animals I think I've ever seen. And they're also an omnivore, which is kind of cool. If you're out scouting, I don't know how many of you go into reading scat or studying scat out in the neighborhood. And not the most pleasant thing to talk about, but as a wildlife biologist, it's fascinating. In the winter, we find most of his scat will have fur into it because that's his primary food source. Or probably 2/3 of the year, where there's ample food supply of berries and things of that nature, you'll find nothing but seeds in his scat. And that tells you what we're looking for right there, because most of this guy, he'll eat pawpaws, he'll eat wild grapes. One of the big things he does in a farmer's hater is he eats pumpkins, stuff like that. But they're just a fascinating animal and just enjoyable to watch in all aspects of it. And they're very curious too. They don't always bolt when they see you. They'll sit there and try to figure you out as much as you try to figure them out. This is one. Remember I said about you just snap away and snap away? That's a phoebe. That's one of your birds, one of the first birds you'll see in the spring when spring comes. And he's the one, when he sits, his tail's always flipping up and down, flipping up and down, flipping up and down. He makes probably you've had him near your house. He makes nest up under the eaves out of moss and stuff of that nature. He's always under the bridges and stuff. And he gets the name Phoebe because he goes, Phoebe, Phoebe. That's not a very good impression. But anyway, I was focusing on this guy at a place here down near Baltimore, at Black Marsh. And I was shooting him. And not until I looked later that I realized the spider web came into it like this. And that was no skill on my part. That was sheer luck on my end of it. And I got this, and that's one of my favorite pictures I've gotten this year. Not so much the species of the animal, but the spider web and the leaf in it, and just the overall pictures and colors into it. I like to say it was skill, but it was just pure luck. Woodchuck. That's an interesting critter. Now, this picture doesn't really show it, but this guy's up in a tree. Woodchucks can climb. This guy actually was about 20 feet up in a tree right there. I was going along the road and I saw this dark object moving up high in the tree, and I figured out. So I stopped my car, run through the field like a maniac, started snapping away, and realized it was a woodchuck. And my first thought was, it's a woodchuck. But then you have to discipline yourself to look at them, because they are interesting animals, which we sort of take for granted. Now, the name woodchuck, we've always called them woodchucks or groundhogs. But the name woodchuck really has nothing to do with wood. The Native Americans, the Algonquins, referred to him as weedjuck, which means least like a bear. When the colonists came over, for whatever reason, they took weedjuck and started calling him woodchuck. And to this day, he's been called a woodchuck. And it has nothing to do with wood, because he's primarily an herbivore. He eats nothing but grasses and plants of that nature, nothing to do with wood. So that old thing, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck a wood? That's like Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh really doesn't need honey, you know, one of those silly things. But these guys are interesting critters. They also call them whistle pigs. And the reason is their mating call is a high-pitched whistle. And if you really want to have some fun, you know how terrible my life is now, go out in the field in the springtime and sound like a go high, very high pitched. All the males will come out to see who's competing with them, and all the females will come out to say who's whistling at her. And you get all kinds of pictures of these guys. It's one of my favorite animals. This guy like 20 feet in the tree. My guess is somebody chasing him up in there. You ever wonder why birds, ducks' feet don't freeze in the winter? It's a great blue heron up at Eden Mill a few years ago, one of the big snowstorms, and this picture just struck me. This guy's out there feeding, and the reason their feet don't freeze, they have very few blood capillaries in their legs, so there's nothing to freeze in them. They have minimal blood capillary or veins that run through the legs, so there's really nothing to freeze. Now, this is one we've all seen somewhere around before, or at least over the years we have. We see less and less of them. This is one of my favorites of a box turtle. Another thing about taking photographs is try your best, particularly with wildlife, is not be that human picture taker who stands there upright, shooting pictures of all the critters around him. We get the same perspective. Sometimes you have to do what I call, when I work with my naturalists, called dirt time. Lay down on the grass, get wet, get dirty, get face to face with this guy. Now, obviously, that wasn't a 600 millimeter lens, but I was pretty much face to face with him. One of my favorite ones, a box turtle. And box turtle, which are really kind of cool, if you see the color of the eyes on that particular guy, we can tell whether that's a male or a female. All male box turtles almost always have either red or bright red or bright orange eyes like that. The female will always have brown eyes. The other way to determine is if you look under their top shell is called a carapace, their bottom shell is called a plastron. And if we turn them over and look at the plastron, the male is going to have a flat plastron. The female is going to have a big indentation, or the male is going to have an indentation in the plastron, and the female is going to have a flat one. That's another quick way to tell the difference. If they're in their shell, and we'll pull their head out, and you can't get to see them. Just one of my favorite critters. This guy, his favorite food is earthworms. And if you ever noticed as a kid when you were looking for them, or even today, most of the time you'll see a box turtle after a rainy day. And the reason is when the rain soaks into the earth and the raindrops are beating on the earthworms hear that, feel the vibrations, they leave and come up to the surface, because if you ever go after a rainy day, is your sidewalk covered in earthworms? Because they come up so they don't get flooded out. This guy's figured that out. So on a rainy day, he comes out and it's just like having a big salad bar out there, except it's full of earthworms. Now, one cool thing about this, if we go through long periods without rain, and this guy is hungry and he wants some earthworms because he'll eat plants, but he also needs meat in his diet. He'll become very sick if he doesn't. He will actually spread all 4 feet out, rock back and forth, and drum his feet on the ground to mimic the vibrations of raindrops hitting the ground. The worms underneath feel the vibrations. They come flying up out of the ground because they think it's going to rain. And guess who's waiting for them? It's like this guy went to McDonald's. He got himself all the earthworm burgers that he wanted. It's pretty cool. You might have heard of the fishermen used to drive a rod in the ground and tap it with a hammer, and then the worms would come up. They take them for fishing. The same theory. The vibrations drive the earthworms up. All kinds of strange stuff in natural history. Well, not a chipmunk, but there's our gray squirrel. Now, what he's feasting on is something that all of us would not like to go to. This is poison ivy. Those are poison ivy berries. And many, many animals, if we did not have the abundance of poison ivy and the berries that they produce, a lot of our animals would not survive the winter. We're the only creature that poison ivy messes with. But the poison ivy berries are a big food staple for gray squirrels in the winter. I don't know how many of you have ever seen a pileated woodpecker. A lot of your woodpeckers, the red-bellied woodpeckers, the poison ivy berries in the winter are a very big food staple for them to survive on, because they hang around. The berries are there all winter long. if you're a photographer and you keep your eyes open and find where all the poison ivy is, all the stands of it, and you want to get some cool pictures, because in the winter, animals working harder to feed and they're less worried about running from us. So if you want to set some cool pictures of like a pileated woodpecker or some of the other woodpeckers we got around, find a stand of poison ivy that has berries on it and go back day after day after day, and I guarantee you'll get some really wonderful shots of it. So that's part of being a naturalist there. But now this is my Walking Dead Cardinal here. When I first time I've read about this, I've heard about this, and one winter I was out there on my deck and I looked out and I said, oh my God. And that poor Cardinal, we feel kind of sorry for him, but all he's doing is birds, every feather on a bird on a regular basis, they get rid of, they shed them out, they molt, and then they grow new ones. For whatever reason, certain species, and one of them is the Cardinal, they drop all the feathers off their head almost all at one time. So that's where we have this Walking Dead looking Cardinal out here. So it's a horrible looking thing, but don't feel too bad for him. That's a normal thing going on. And a very short amount of time, his feathers will grow back. When you first see one, you just go, oh my God. Probably say worse than that. Deer. This is something we got so many around here. Have you ever seen such a gnarly face? That is to me is the classic. This is an old deer. Look at her nose, it's all torn up. Look at the ear on our left as you face it, it's chewed off on it. I go up to a place called Muddy Run Park, which is a Pennsylvania Power and Light. I think it's PPNL now. It's a 5,000 acre park that they have for big impoundment ponds. Anyway, you can go up there and nobody hunts in there, and these deer are everywhere. And this particular old gal, walked around a bend one day, and there she was. She stood up and just looked at me, didn't bother to run off. And I just started snapping pictures of her. And I don't think I realized what I had until later I looked at it and I said, that face is classic, just a beautiful face. I figured she looked at my old face and figured, man, we're a lot alike, so we're not going to run off on each other here. But I've gone up, I guess over that year, I saw her 2 or 3 more times, and she just never bolted or took off. But it's just one of those faces.
Well, Frank.
Yes.
It's a little after 8, and I've got a couple questions waiting in the chat. This would be a good time to kind of open it up as a Q&A session, and then after a few minutes of that, we will open up the breakout rooms. But the first question is about coyotes.
Yep.
And asking about, it's a 2-parter. Have you had any encounters with them in Harford County? And are there any places to watch for them?
Coyotes are much more abundant than folks realize. A lot of people feel that the coyote is they compare them to wolves, and it's this big monster animal. They're actually only about twice the size of a red fox. They're not really that big. They're very spindly. I would say anybody that has spent time outdoors, I'll absolutely guarantee that you've got them over there at your Conservancy. Anybody who spent enough time outdoors early and late has probably seen one and just thought it was a dog, or possibly even a fox they saw with a different coloration. They're very spindly. I guess I know in Harford County, they've been seeing them for at least 30 to 40 years. They see them in Baltimore, the park, Lincoln Park. They see them down there in Baltimore on a regular basis. These guys are very opportunistic. They don't really like to bother people. They don't like people. They don't want us anymore. A lot of people want them around. I don't think there was ever any concern of coyotes bothering people up until recent history, and I think that's due to the overcrowding of their situations. I mean, it's rare that anybody's ever run into them. We see them all the time. Yes, they're here. I've had the pleasure of actually one winter over in the Gunpowder River. I was snowshoeing in a heavy snowstorm because I wanted to see what I would come across. And I came across some what I thought was coyote tracks. So I started following them, and I realized that within a short amount of time it was coyote, and I was going by the gait and the distance apart. But coyotes will do, if you've ever snowshoed, you always have a lead person who what they call breaks snow. They push it down, and then the next person in their snowshoes steps directly in the footsteps of the person that was in front of them. So nobody's working that hard, and then they rotate around, somebody else will break snow. Well, coyotes will do the same thing. But when they stop, they'll part and sit next to each other. Then when they take off again, they switch who the lead one is. So I'm tracking this, what I thought was a coyote, and all of a sudden, again, this is so cool, where they sat down on their haunches, they were next to each other. Up to that point, I only thought I had one. Then they took off. So I decided, because it was snowing, but these tracks were clean as a bell, so I started following them. They're going up a hill. I followed down a hill. And then I suddenly realized they were following me as much as I was following them. I was going in circles, and I would find spots where they sat down on a bluff and watched me for a while. Then I would finally get up there, and they were on the other bluff watching me. So it's kind of an enjoyable thing to do. Coyotes are another part of without them, we'd have more rodents, so we know what to do with. There are so many creatures a lot of folks question, but without them, we would be overrun with rodents. And that's why you find them in Baltimore quite a bit. The rodent population down there, they see them in all the parks. They see them walking down alleys. They're just about everywhere. They're pretty opportunistic. So I hope that answers it. Origins, where they come from, that's another whole world right there.
Well, thank you. We have a question about the earthworms and the box turtles. And if earthworms are not native, how did box turtles know to stomp on the dry ground to bring the worms to the surface?
Well, the particular earthworms we have now are not native, but we had earthworms that were native here. So the box turtles have always had a worm population. I just sort of use earthworm as a generic term for all the different worms. And if we all know there's probably 10 or 12 different species of them. And animals also learn to adapt. I'm not going to say that, but so it's not just the earthworms. By vibrating the ground, worms will come up, and this has gone on for an awfully long time. So yes, I know that the worms we have are all European worms, the majority of them. Actually, they consider, not to go into deep on earthworms, but they consider the understory of our forest is nothing like it was in colonial times, for the sheer fact that the earthworms consume so much of the leaf litter as it comes down that we don't have the depth of it that we used to, which allowed a lot more acorns to take seed and other things like that. So that's a story in itself, what the worms have done and where they came from. They came out of ballast of ships and everything else. So I digress from that exact question, but there's always been earthworms of one kind or another, not necessarily the species that we pay attention to now.
Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat right now. What I would really love to do is give you a chance to tell us a little bit about this last photo.
Okay.
And then we will, I'll tell everybody how we're going to work the breakout rooms.
All right. This is my last photo I get to show. I got hundreds of them, but anyway, I just did.
Well, I'll tell you, we don't have a lot of questions. We have a lot of cheers for you to come back to the Conservancy and share more of your photos and your stories with us.
And I have done that there. This particular one, these are two pileated woodpeckers, a male and a female. And I, every once in a while, just say to myself, I have never photographed a pileated woodpecker nest. I see pileateds all the time, all over the place. And this is, so every once in a while I'll say, okay, I'm going to just focus this year on finding a pileated woodpecker nest. I spent about 2 months everywhere looking for pileateds. I'd see them, I'd watch them, I watch where they go, and I go check the trees, and probably aged a year just looking for them, couldn't find them. So one day I'm driving down my driveway, and I see this pileated, and again, I pretty much discipline myself, unless I'm really in a rush, I'll stop, get my camera out, and start taking pictures. So I'm snapping away at this particular pileated, and it's the one on the right side of this picture. He goes up to this tree, and the hole happened to be there, and I'm clicking away on him, and I didn't even know I got the picture of the female coming out of the tree. All of a sudden, there's another one flying. I said, "Oh my God, there's a nest!" And when I finally looked at my camera, I had him on the tree and her coming out of it in the same frame, which I never saw in my eyes just by clicking away. Now, the most interesting part of this, I've been searching high and low for a pileated woodpecker nest. Well, this is a tree right next to my mailbox down along the road. So you never know where you're going to find stuff. But they are the largest woodpecker we got around here. If anybody's ever enjoyed Woody Woodpecker in the world, a guy named Walter Lance drew him based on a pileated woodpecker. If you're ever searching for woodpeckers, we've all been out in the woods and heard the pecking sounds. Well, A regular woodpecker just sort of like a drill. Just, this guy is peck, 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 peck. So if you hear that sound, take the time to look, and you'll probably see him because he's about the size of a crow. He's like, maybe a little bit smaller, but he's a good sized bird.
All right. So we did get one more question in the chat. And this is a great question, I think, to end on before we move into breakout rooms. In the coming winter months, what are you hoping to photograph or see as you venture out?
Well, one of the beauties, I send out a regular email. As a matter of fact, I just almost every week or 2 weeks. And I sent one out this time to smell and feel of fall as we get this cold weather. And what I enjoy about fall is the fact that during the summer, all the high plants and everything, it's kind of hard to see your wildlife or get a distinct look at them. But once the plants die off, once they're down, these guys are not only working hard to eat, so they're not as reticent to see us, but also their camouflage is not as prevalent. So in the winter, my favorite time to look for foxes in the winter. One of my goals this winter, we're talking about coyotes. I have never photographed a coyote. I've never had an opportunity. So it just never came across my lap. So this winter, I'm going to focus on, now that I'm retired too, and I got the time to be a lazy bum, is I'm going to focus on looking for a coyote, look for their dens. In the winter, it's a good time to look for dens, like fox dens, so that you can be ready to spot them. If we get a snowy day, foxes that are mated up will come in and out of their den and leave muddy spots all around the opening of it. And that means in the spring, they're going to have kits. So then you keep coming back around the time that they should have kits, and you can watch them out there playing and looking at you because you got about a 2-week window where they're not scared of you. So I guess what I'm going to look for this winter, I want to find a coyote, but mostly I enjoy going after the foxes up in the not going after, excuse me, photographing the foxes.
Great, great. Well, I'm going to ask you to end your screen share, and then if we want to go, the rest of us, we can all go into gallery view. If you want to turn your camera back on, we can all give you, a silent applause. Thank you so much, Frank, for being with us tonight and sharing all your photographs and your stories. Thank you for taking our questions. And now we'd love to be able to have a little interactivity. So I'm going to just give you a quick save the date for our January program. While everyone is, I can see the applause. I hope you can see it, Frank. If you put in gallery view, you can see our photos. We'll stay muted, but cameras on, and thank you. And so we will have to talk about getting you back, because this was a fantastic program. Your photographs are lovely. Your stories are so interesting. And if all of you guests could save the date for January 21st, we will have award-winning author and wildlife photographer Paul Bannock with us to discuss his new book on the snowy owl. But for now, if you'd like to hang out and mix and mingle a little bit,